Hi, Ravi. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you come August, and it's going to be 2 years since the official launch of Game and our mission to catalyze an ecosystem creating 10 million entrepreneurs. I thought this was a good time to catch up with you and really understand what you've learned in these 2 years of our journey. Um, and my first question is if you can actually break down the different terms of entrepreneurship. We kind of live in this world, we use these words, but it'll be good for our audience, to people who are becoming a part of our ecosystem, to know a little more. So if you can tell us the difference between a necessity entrepreneur, an opportunity entrepreneur, a startup, a mass entrepreneur, that'll be a good start.
Well, first of all, thanks for the reminder. I'm sort of a little shocked that it's been nearly 2 years already. Time has flown. And so we're 2 years into our 10-year journey. But specifically to your question, the term entrepreneurship obviously is used very widely by many people in many contexts. And one of the important distinctions is the one that you asked in your question. So, the vast majority of people who we call entrepreneurs are really self-employed. They are entrepreneurs in the sense of taking risk and doing some business activity, largely out of necessity to stay alive and feed their families and themselves. They are not classical entrepreneurs in the sense of they're not driven by opportunity. So the lady who comes with a vegetable cart, or the tea stall owner, they're classic examples of necessity entrepreneurs, and many of them remain just with one employee, the self-employed person, and don't grow to create jobs and so forth. They occupy an enormously important role in the economy, because it's in many ways it's also a proxy for unemployment, which is the unemployed, and they're doing this, and therefore it's very crucial. But when our work, our mission is a lot about how do we create enough dynamism and growth in the economy, and how do we create, make sure there are enough jobs and livelihood opportunities. And this class of entrepreneur doesn't create jobs. So important as they are, our focus lies elsewhere. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the typical Bangalore type of startup, in the sense that they are typically technology companies, or very heavily tech-enabled business models, usually venture capital funded, or hope to get venture backed. And that's again a very crucial part of the economy. But these firms, think Flipkart or Swiggy or any of them, they don't tend to create a large number of jobs. They are important for the gig economy, but they're the other end of the spectrum. In between is a very vast number of enterprises. Typically, you think about your restaurant, or your barber shop, or beautician, and so forth. And millions of businesses. They are ordinary, unheralded, uncelebrated, but they use local inputs, local labor to serve typically local needs, although they can be part of value chains. And these truly are the job creating engines of any economy. So they start out micro, and if they grow, they become small businesses, and then very few of them actually become medium-sized enterprises. And that growth trajectory, like the growth of a tree, is what creates lots and lots of employment. The problem in our country, the one that Game is hoping to influence, is that we've got a very, very large percentage of our folks who are necessity entrepreneurs and self-employed. Think about 95%. There's just not enough of these kinds of mundane but crucially important mass entrepreneurs. And what we hope to do is stimulate many more of these enterprises to spring into existence and grow. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, I think the way we want people to think about this distinction. It's an important distinction.
And that actually nicely leads me to the next question. I want to keep our conversation focused on mass entrepreneurs because they're front and center to game. You've been emphatic that entrepreneurs are the locomotives of the economy. Why do you insist on this?
I haven't been emphatic. It's a turn of phrase because I think it's a nice picture. It's an engine or a locomotive that's pulling a lot of wagons or cars along. So yeah, if you think about it, how does wealth get created in an economy? Where does innovation happen? Where does it come from? Who creates employment and jobs? It's not the government, right? In any economy. So this is typically the realm of businesses, and that to entrepreneurially driven enterprises. So if you think about an entrepreneur, somebody who sees an opportunity and takes risk in pursuit of that opportunity, hoping to make a profit, right? And that's how wealth gets created. That's how innovation happens, and that's how jobs get created. Joseph Schumpeter, the great economist, defined profit, all profit, and all wealth creation as return on successful innovation. Who innovates? Behind every innovation is an innovator and an entrepreneur. So in that sense, if you don't have enough entrepreneurial activity in an economy, then it loses something that Ned Phelps, the Nobel Prize winning economist, calls dynamism. So dynamism and vitality in a healthy economy are essentially the result of lots and lots of people tinkering, inventing, starting enterprises of the most ordinary sort, and then some of them, of course, become extraordinary. Is that
No, it absolutely does. And you nicely cue my next question because it was going to be really related to Ned Phelps, given how he's largely influenced game. And, what are the key elements of a dynamic economy, the way he highlights and we hope to recreate?
Yeah, so first of all, for those tuning in and who don't know who Ned Phelps is, he's an economist at Columbia University in New York. And he won the 2006 Nobel Prize for economics and has very largely influenced my thinking and Game's thinking on the whole issue of mass entrepreneurship. His first book that I read was called Mass Flourishing. And his a second book, which just came out, is called The Dynamism of Nations. And the second one builds on the first. And Ned actually begins to go back in history to why did Britain suddenly become so industrialized, wealthy, and prosperous? Why did the first industrial revolution happen there rather than somewhere else in Europe or in China or India? Why did that dynamism then move away from Britain to America? Why is America now losing its dynamism? These are kind of the issues that he explores in both these books. And he uses the term dynamism to essentially describe what happens in a healthy economy, which, as I said, is best manifested as millions and millions of ordinary people with no great educational qualifications, pedigree, or great means or particular talent, just feeling empowered to tinker, to invent, to improve things, to start businesses. And many of these remain mundane. Some of them become extraordinary companies like, let's say, General Electric of the last century, or Ford Motor Company, or whatever. Apple and Microsoft, for more recent examples. So the conclusion that he comes to, though, is the most interesting and breathtakingly different from other economists. And he says it comes down to what are the dominant values in a society. And he talks a lot about what are called modern values. And in particular, certain modern values like individualism, right? Which means the characteristic of thinking for yourself, the idea of self-determination, which is you believe that the locus of control in your life, no matter how poor or difficult your circumstance, you believe that the control of your life is not in God's hands or nature's hands or somebody else's hands, but in your own hands. And therefore you can aspire to make a better life for yourself. He talks about another value being vitalism, which is having the courage to take initiative, to take risk, to imagine new things, etc. Self-expression, and which is about tinkering, creativity, and expressing yourself in so many ways, as an artist, as a musician, as an inventor, as an entrepreneur, whatever. And he talks about how these values became important in Europe and Britain as a result of the Enlightenment that happened there. And that resulted not just in the first industrial revolution, but also it resulted in the great voyages, the explorers of that period of time, from the 1500s, 1600s, the Magellan, the Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, all that sort of stuff. And of course, the Renaissance itself and the explosion in science. So he points out, therefore, that if you want dynamism in a society, you have to go back to what are the values. And if you can't influence the value system to be embracing some of these ideas, it's pretty hard. I think that has enormous consequences for our country, for instance. Why is Bangalore or Gurgaon so dynamic in that sense? Why have these become hubs of entrepreneurial activity? Well, a lot of it is because of this value system, where risk-taking is not discouraged, but actually encouraged. You see successful entrepreneurs like Narayan Murthy of the first generation, or Sachin and Binny Bansal, and the Ritesh Agarwals and Bhavesh Agarwals and so forth of the next generation. And you want to emulate them. So risk-taking is encouraged. Failure is no shame. It's just part of trying, and if you don't succeed the first time, well, keep trying. There is a real sense of equality when you come to these cities, because it's a bunch of people thrown together into this cauldron. There are very few native Bangaloreans. Most people are actually transplants from elsewhere. And so you don't tend to care that much about traditional things like caste and, and so forth, socioeconomic differences. There's fundamentally a greater level of equality, a belief that everybody has talent, everybody has the right to pursue their happiness and their dream. Whereas you go to some other part, it's like a Muzaffarpur or some place where there is a rigid hierarchy based on caste and economics. And you don't believe that somebody from a poorer background can actually invent or start something or do something great. If we can't shift the value system, then it's unlikely then to have this quality of dynamism. So, this is just one of the most central ideas and one of the most refreshing takes I have seen. And much of game is about trying to see, can we, through interventions, create local pockets which are dynamic? And then if you know how to do that, can you get many, many more pockets happening? And eventually, these may connect and create a conflagration. That's kind of the theory of change.
And he also, Ned Phelps, talks a lot about the unique behaviors, right, of a dynamic economy, about grit and empathy and self-determination, building from what you said earlier. But if you can just push a little more on that.
Sure. No, look, these values that he talks about, societal values, manifest in an individual in terms of their character traits. So, for instance, risk-taking is directly attributable to a value that he calls individualism. Or there are other qualities, for instance, self-determination. That is, you say, look, I don't have to take a government job like my family wants me to and everybody else seems to want. I'm going to actually go strike out on my own path. And if I don't succeed, maybe I'll go get a job. The tenacity or grit to not give up the first time you encounter failure, but just pick yourself up and keep going till you're successful is another quality of anybody who's successful, of course, all entrepreneurs. Resourcefulness, the ability to go somehow cobble together the resources and then stretch those to be able to demonstrate proof of concept of your business or whatever invention is another thing. So these values manifest very much in the characteristics that make for most successful people and most successful entrepreneurs. And fortunately, these are qualities that are there in many, if not most people. The problem is they're latent. And the question for GAME and all our partners is, what are the experiences that we can give a person that strengthens these qualities and allows them to manifest? And so, for instance, the work that our co-founder Mekin Maheshwari is doing through his Udyam Foundation with schools in Delhi, for example, is very, very powerful. You take young kids, 9 to 12 standard, from some of the poorest and most difficult socioeconomic backgrounds, and government schools. And who goes to a government school? Only those whose parents can't afford to go to a private school, right? So these interventions result in kids from these backgrounds just coming to life. And of course, there are videos on our website which show that. And so this is to Ned's point, this is not an elitist value system. It's not an elitist activity. This is one of the most democratic ideas that everybody has capability and latent potential. And the education system in most countries doesn't do much to enhance it. In fact, there's a lot to put a lid on these qualities, but through very simple interventions of the sort that we are playing with, I can cause a person to just catch fire. It's a very powerful idea. Did I answer your?
Sorry, carry on.
Did I answer your question?
No, you did. You've been answering all my questions really well. I want to build on the narrative. I find it so powerful and interesting, and that I can relate to, on the aspect of seed, soil, and climate of a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah. So the more I have tried to understand, why does entrepreneurship thrive in, say, a Silicon Valley? Why does it thrive in Bangalore or a Gurgaon? Why does it not thrive in some other places? The more I've come to use gardening metaphor, which is, if you want to create a beautiful garden, then of course you need to have good seeds of the right kind of flowers or vegetables or whatever. And then you need to prepare the soil. The soil has to be fertile and ready to receive these seeds. And then you need good climate, which allows germination and these plants to blossom and flourish. And then with a little luck, you get a beautiful garden and a good harvest, a bountiful harvest. And I think we need to think in very similar ways about how to create the conditions for dynamism and vibrant entrepreneurial activity in a place. The seed, if you will, is the quality of entrepreneurs, or proto-entrepreneurs, if you want to think about it that way, which is lots and lots of people, particularly young people, who have a great ambition to do something with their lives. They don't know always exactly what to do with it, or whatever, but they want to be successful, and they're willing to take risk and work at it. So that's your seed. And education really helps a great deal. Soil is, think about it as, by and large, infrastructure. So is that place well connected? Does it have good rail, road connectivity? Is there electricity? It's very hard to have much dynamism and entrepreneurial activity, or any activity, if you don't have access to affordable energy, which we of course take for granted, but shouldn't be in many parts of India and many parts of the world. So the linkages to markets, there are some places where there may be reasonable local demand, typically, district headquarters or a town or a city. But there are many other places which are far removed, and therefore there isn't enough local opportunity, and you therefore need linkages to markets, which can happen, which is both digital linkages as well as physical linkages. So these are the kinds of things which describe soil. Oh, I'd also put very much in soil, what is the quality of educational system out there? Schools, colleges, institutes for higher learning, research. One of the reasons why Bangalore does so well is because for a long time it has had very high quality educational institutions and scientific institutions that produced this talent. So that's kind of in the soil. And climate would be two things. One is, how easy is it to start and run and grow a business, or how difficult is it? And this is what today we use the jargon of ease of doing business. And of course, India has made some progress in recent years on the World Bank way of measuring it. But the reality is, in most parts of our country, it is extraordinarily hard, ferociously hard to start a business and be compliant with the many rules and regulations that apply to your business. And of course, that becomes an opportunity for predatory rent-seeking behavior by various corrupt officials who from day zero show up wanting to collect a bit of your revenue. So how easy or hard is it to do that? And the other aspect of climate is culture, which is back to the Ned Phelps values. Does it encourage or discourage risk-taking? Does it tolerate, celebrate failure? Who are the role models in this place? What does this society define success as? These kinds of things. And that culture becomes very important. Why are Marwadis, for instance, as a community, so dynamic and entrepreneurially successful? Because their culture reinforces many of these traits. So if you are thinking more and more, my thinking more and more is, you have to figure out in a place how to make interventions at the level of seed and soil and climate. And if all the conditions begin to cross a certain threshold, then you begin to get a self-sustaining entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that's what we're trying to demonstrate in some places. We're trying to demonstrate that in game as with women entrepreneurs in places like Bangalore, in Meghalaya and Shillong. We may start soon in Ludhiana. And we picked intentionally some combination of places where there are already favorable conditions, and other places which are more difficult, because you want to learn from these differences, and obviously places with very different cultural and soil conditions.
You know, everything you've said and everything you've touched on, we cannot discuss ecosystems and economies without really talking about the role of the government, right?
Sure.
What is the role of the government in creating a flourishing ecosystem?
It's a very complex question. But I think at a certain, to keep things simple, it is the job of government to do certain things. For instance, it's the job of government to ensure that its citizens and population is well educated and reasonably trained. It is the job of government to ensure that population is nourished and healthy. Okay? It is the job of government to build infrastructure like roads and ports and electricity, and ensure internet access in modern times, etc. And it is the job of government to make sure that it is not onerously hard to start or run a business. Okay, so these are the basics, and this is what the local government and state government by and large should ensure it does well. Anything else it does that provides a tailwind, like tax incentives, some policy, those are all bonuses. If you do the basics really well, it is fantastic, okay, because it addresses seed, soil, and climate to a certain extent. So the problem is that in many, many places, the government doesn't do its job well, and it starts thinking about what it can do to promote startups and so forth. That really is not particularly useful or helpful. I think people will find a way to be entrepreneurial and inventive and successful if you give them half a chance. So if you look at the way the IT services revolution happened in India in the 90s and the early part of this decade, a lot of it will happen because government played a very wise role in doing what only government can do and getting out of the way and letting private enterprise do the rest. So in a place like Bangalore, which is where a lot of it started and happened, the government created good policies, for instance, allowing connectivity, internet access. It created good policy that allowed the import of hardware and software without duties. It created the STPI, Software Technology Parks of India policy that allowed any place that is export oriented to be cordoned off and call itself a STPI, and therefore have special privileges, including tax benefits. And it didn't get very involved and make it difficult to start for anyone with an idea to start coding and start an IT company. And as a result, once the first few companies were successful, millions of people tried to emulate them. And for the longest time, the government prudently stayed out of the way. So I think that's the role of government. It should do its core job well and stay out of the way in places where it really cannot add value, and the private sector and the market can best do its job. The ease of doing business, though, is one of the biggest challenges for ordinary businesses in India. One of the interesting questions we looked at is, why are more than 80% of our businesses, perhaps 90% of our businesses, informal? Okay, that means they are not registered, they don't pay GST and other taxes and so forth. And also, as a consequence, why do most of our enterprises have less than 5 employees? More than 96% of all businesses in India have less than 5 employees, and they don't grow, they remain stunted or dwarfs, and they therefore don't create jobs and remain low cost, low productivity, low wage enterprises. And the reason is because if you start out formal, the cost of complying with all the many rules and regulations which are there in a particular state or a particular city are just so onerous, and there's so much predatory rent-seeking behavior that it becomes quite costly and difficult. So many people prefer to remain informal, so they fly under the radar. The problem with informality is that you can't, for instance, it becomes difficult to access bank loans and credit. And without ability to access bank loans, you're not able to pay wages, you're not able to invest in capital equipment or machinery or whatever, and get on a productive growth path. And that's the reason why things really remain stunted. So if there's one thing I would say that government, and particularly at the center and at the states and local government, can do, is just use this COVID crisis to go back and roll back a whole bunch of regulations and red tape that inhibit entrepreneurial and business activity. I remember Prime Minister Modi in his election campaign of 2014 saying, I'm going to really roll back bureaucracy and government, and I'm going to make red tape into red carpet. I think we need to live up to that right now.
Red tape to red carpet. I like that. I've actually left my favorite question for the last,
which is
about aspirations. Because if we'd figured everything out, all of what we spoke about today, and there was no aspiration, it wouldn't amount to a lot, because you do need aspirations. You'd get somewhere, but perhaps not the scale of 10 million entrepreneurs without local entrepreneurial aspiration, making this whole thing a movement. What are we thinking about it at GAME, Ravi? I'd like to hear from you.
First of all, I think aspiration is a very fundamental part of being human. So it's there in every person. Okay, the ambition to be, the desire to be happy, the desire to be successful, to have a good life is there in every human being. In fact, it's there in every creature, living being. And the problem is that we inadvertently beat it out of people. Okay, so like curiosity, it's there in every child, but somewhere in the process of raising a child, we beat the curiosity out of many of them. So I'm not worried about, aspiration. The question is, how do we uncover that in many, many more people, allowing them to then express it and pursue it. And this is where I'm, again, incredibly excited by the work that has been being done in Delhi schools, thanks to, in particular, to the encouragement of people like Manish Sisodia and Atishi and many others who are supporting part of that experiment, like Make It. Because it shows that you can, in a very short period of time, 2 months, 3 months, light that fire again in young people. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is role models. Who is a success? Who do you try to emulate? So if you look at India's success in cricket over the last couple of decades, it's because we've celebrated cricketing heroes, like Dhoni and others. And they've done remarkably well, not just in recognition, but in financial terms too. So of course, that inspires millions and millions of young people to start playing cricket. And so the same thing happened in the IT boom in India. So we actually don't have to look back or look outside India for examples of how do you ignite aspirations. So what happened with the IT success is every chowkidar's son, every maid's daughter wanted to become an IT engineer, and their parents would, sacrifice greatly to send them to some IT program or BSc or something in IT or an engineering degree in IT. So I think role models of success are very, very, very crucial. And so I think we need to do a far better job as an alliance, showcasing these role models of success. And they have to be relatable role models. So showing, Elon Musk as a stunning success, or Jeff Bezos may not be as inspiring as somebody like you who's made it big. Today, there are lots of role models of success for youth which are not constructive. Okay, and they're highlighted quite well in Snigdha Poonam's book, The Dreamers. And so we've got to give them better role models. And I think many young people will then do what's needed. And finally, I think talking about how do you spread successful models, we came together as an alliance, right? We said, look, it's not about 10 of us in game who are becoming smarter and learning all these wonderful things. We have to facilitate the whole ecosystem of lots and lots of different types of people, government, private sector, entrepreneur development organizations, educational systems, all learning about these ideas and learning about successful models, because people are smart. Once they see something that works, they're going to copy it. They're going to adapt it to their local environment. They're going to copy it. So I think that's how we hope over the next decade or so, successes will be replicated and propagated. I hope I answered your question.
No, thank you, Ravi. And I think that's a good note, one of hope and aspiration to end this conversation.
Look, it's all there. The seed is there. Its potential to become this beautiful giant rain tree is there in this tiny seed. We've just got to figure out how to create the conditions that allow it to become that rain tree. It's there in millions and millions of people.
Absolutely. And as we make this a movement, I'm glad I'm part of this journey with you at Game. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. This is the most, I think, interesting and important thing I've ever done. And I'm delighted to be part this collective effort. Thanks again.